Welcome to WCC TV. We hope you enjoy your time with us. Please like, subscribe and click on that link so that you'll receive notifications whenever online. Why don't you share this right now with your family and friends so that they can learn how to live their lives for God.
There's a young man hiding in the shadows. Can you see him? That's Peter. Peter the apostle, Peter the impetuous, Peter the passionate. He once walked on water. He'll soon preach to thousands and be fearless in front of both friends and foes. But right now, the one who stepped on the water has hurried into hiding. The one who will one day speak with power is weeping in pain. He's not sniffling or whimpering. He's full-blown bawling. His bearded face is buried in his thick hands. His howl echoes throughout Jerusalem at night. I wonder what hurts more, the fact that he did it or the fact that he swore he never would. He pledged, "Lord, I am ready to go with you to prison and even to die with you." But Jesus said, "Peter, before the rooster crows this day, you will say 3 times that you don't know me." Denying Christ on the night of his betrayal was bad enough, but did he have to boast that he wouldn't? And one denial was pitiful, but 3? 3 denials were horrific, but did he have to curse? Matthew 26 says, Peter began to place a curse on himself and swear, "I don't know the man." Talk about things going from bad to worse. And now, awash in a whirlpool of sorrow, Peter is hiding in the shadows and weeping. But soon he will be fishing. Fishing? Why fishing? Hadn't Peter given it up? 2 years earlier, when Jesus called him to fish for men, didn't he drop his net and follow? We haven't seen him fish since. We never see him fish again. So why is he fishing now? Especially now. Jesus has risen from the dead. Peter has seen the empty tomb. Who could fish at a time like this? Were they hungry? Maybe that's all it was. It's possible the expedition was born out of growling stomachs, but then again, maybe it was born out of a broken heart. You see, Peter could not deny his denial. The empty tomb didn't erase the crowing rooster. Christ had returned, but Peter must have wondered, after what I did, would he return for someone like me? Surely we can relate. Is Peter the only person to do the very thing he swore he'd never do? Infidelity is behind me. From now on, I'm going to bridle my tongue. No more shady deals. I've learned my lesson. Oh, the volume of our boasting. And oh, the heartbreak of our shame. Rather than resist the flirting, we return it. Rather than ignore the gossip, we share it. Rather than stick to the truth, we shade it. And the rooster crows. And the conviction pierces. And Peter has a partner in the shadows. We go back to our old lives. We return to our pre-Jesus practices and do what comes naturally rather than what comes spiritually. And we question whether Jesus has a place for folks like us. Jesus answers that question. He answers it for you and me and all who tend to peter out on Christ. His answer came on the shore of the sea in a gift to Peter. Do you know what Jesus did? He invited Peter to breakfast. Jesus prepared a meal. What a sight. They reached the shore only to find Jesus next to a fire of coals. The fish were sizzling and the bread was waiting, and the defeater of hell and the ruler of heaven invited his friends to sit down and have a bite. No one could have been more grateful than Peter. The one Satan had sifted like wheat was eating bread at the hand of God. Peter was welcomed to the meal of Christ, right there for the devil and his tempters to see. Jesus acted much like the shepherd described in Psalm 23 and verse 5, when he said, "You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies." Let's look closer at what exactly the shepherd does. Having guided the flock through the valley to the alplands for greener grass, the shepherd must prepare the pasture. This is new land, so he must be careful. Ideally, the grazing area will be flat. The shepherd searches for poisonous plants and ample water. He looks for signs of danger, wolves, coyotes, and let's not forget snakes. Adders are small brown reptiles that live underground, and they're known to pop out of their holes and nip sheep on the nose. One bite can infect or even kill. As defense against the snake, the shepherd pours a circle of oil at the top of each adder's hole. He also applies oil to the noses of the animals. The oil on the snake's hole lubricates the exit, preventing the snake from climbing out, and the smell of oil on the sheep's nose drives the serpent away. The shepherd, in a very real sense, has prepared the table. What if your shepherd did for you what the shepherd did for his flock? Suppose he dealt with your enemy, the devil, and prepared you a safe place of nourishment. What if Jesus did for you what he did for Peter? Suppose he, in the hour of your failure, invited you to a meal. That's exactly what he's done. On the night before his death, Jesus prepared a table for his followers. On the first day of the festival of unleavened bread, the day the lambs for the Passover meal were killed, Jesus' disciples asked him, "Where do you want us to go and get the Passover meal ready for you?" And Jesus sent two of them with these instructions. "Go into the city, and a man carrying a jar of water will meet you. Follow him to the house he enters, and say to the owner of the house, 'The teacher says, where is the room where my disciples and I will eat the Passover meal?' Then he will show you a large upstairs room, fixed up and furnished, where you will get everything ready for us." Look who did the preparing here. Jesus reserved a large room and arranged for the guide to lead the disciples. Jesus made certain the room was furnished and the food set out. What did the disciples do? They faithfully complied and they were fed. The shepherd prepared the table. And that's not all. He dealt with the snakes. Remember that one of the disciples didn't complete the meal that night. John 13:2 says, "The devil had already persuaded Judas Iscariot, the son of Simon, to turn against Jesus. Judas started to eat, but Jesus didn't let him finish. When Jesus told him, 'The thing that you will do, do it quickly,' Judas left the room." There is something dynamic in this dismissal. Jesus prepared a table in the presence of the enemy. Judas was allowed to see the supper, but he wasn't allowed to stay there. It's as if God says to the devil, "You are not welcome here. This table is for my children. You may tempt them, you may trip them, but you will never sit with them." This is how much he loves us. Regardless of what we've done and what he knows we are still going to do, he prepares a safe place for us to reflect, to be nourished, and be refreshed in him.
Shame has been one of the most difficult burdens I've carried. In my mother's house, I was raised in the church and really knew the Lord, was taught the Bible. But then in the summers, also a week at Christmas, here was my biological father that was just completely opposite. Some of my earliest memories of him are an 8, 9-year-old boy going from bar to bar with him, buying me like little malt liquors or giving me a drag off of his cigarette. Radically different influences coming at me, drugs, pornography, alcohol, immoral on one side, and then on the other, a very stable, very clean, healthy, sincere teaching about God. By the time I hit 9th or 10th grade, I was an A-B student in athletics, a state champion debater. I was in the school dramas. I had everything going for me. And then a seed of doubt took hold. I went completely the other way. as passionate as I was to know the Lord and to excel and do all these other things, I had this sick passion suddenly. I wanted to know everything about this other culture. I had all these big dreams, being an aerospace engineer, a fighter pilot for the Navy. Everything was set up, made all the grades, but all of those dreams, pretty much any dream, is just incompatible with crack cocaine. Flunked out of college, and so I did the next logical thing, which was join the Marines. In between shipping off for boot camp, this crack cocaine thing is out of control. This crack cocaine addiction costs a lot of money. I get a gun from my house and I commit armed robbery. I remember a hesitation of like, I knew what I was doing. And it was at that point in my life, that's one of the biggest decisions I've ever made. It was bad. I get away, I ship off to boot camp. I just excelled, in that environment. It was a 12, 13-week reprieve from that insanity. I started to have a glimmer of hope, but they sent me home for 10 days. Here's my crack smoking buddy waiting for me. We go out, go on another cocaine binge, and when that money's gone, it worked before, armed robbery, and got away with it. I go back, continue my military training. I'm out drunk one night with what I thought was a buddy. I just tell him everything that I had done, and he ends up literally being a Naval Investigative Service, an NIS narc. A couple of days later, I'm called out of class to my CO's office, and when I come in the door, there's this big manila envelope, and it had Creek County stamped on it, and I knew. I instantly knew what was about to happen, that everything was coming to a screeching halt. I was extradited to Oklahoma, was sentenced. I began serving time. When I came out on parole that first time, if I was a maniac before, I'm a madman now. I turned 21 in prison, made parole 14 months later. And I was kind of proud that I had this new shock value. Yeah, I've been to prison. My favorite thing to do was drive around and just go in convenience stores, go in the bathroom, shoot up, drive around some more, do a U-turn, and I see this police car. And I just kind of knew they were going to pull me over. And they did. They arrest me, even though it's just a small amount of cocaine. It's an automatic felony. I'm still on the suspended sentence for armed robbery. It's just insane what I'm facing at this point. And I remember sitting there, prepared to walk into that courtroom, plead guilty to 10 years, and they would take me back into custody. And I just remember saying out loud, God, I need a miracle. The judge looks over and asks the DA if he's going to suspend the sentence, and it's just like that. I'm confused, my attorney is confused. He says, young man, I'm going to suspend this sentence based on successful completion of the program you're in right now. So I leave the courtroom in awe. I know there is a God, and I know the only explanation for that is a miracle. 2 days after, I end up smoking weed, taking this pill. After what had just happened, I knew it was God, and still threw it back in his face. I remember just thinking, Tim, you will never change. You're never going to change. My heart was broken because I fully realized the depth of my shame. The entire weight of shame was just like this heavy, dark blanket that just pushed my head down. I bowed my head and I was just going to say, God, forgive me. That's all I was going to say. First syllable of God, that's about all I got out. It was like God just took hold of my shoulders, literally yanked me to my feet. Clean, instant sensation. And it was like God was just all of the mistakes, all of the rebellion, everything was just in an instant gone, and I was just clean. Shame can't resist the love of God any more than a grain of sand can resist a flood of waterfall. I finished the program. I've never done cocaine since then. It would have been enough for God just to forgive me. It would have been enough not to send me back to prison, which he didn't. But God didn't stop there. The goodness of God in light of my story, it's embarrassing. Here I am in the midst of this incredible, beautiful family that I don't deserve, this beautiful church community that has embraced me, that knows all of this, knew it all up front, and still invites me to lead the congregation in worshiping God. Shame is no barrier. Guilt, regret, sin, it's no barrier. God can truly take ashes and bring exquisite, unexpected, unimaginable beauty.
Jesus knows our every need, but like Peter, we often doubt and question if there is really a place for us at his table. That's why at the Last Supper, Jesus issued a tender reminder to every one of us. According to Matthew 26, while passing the cup, Jesus said, "Every one of you drink this. This is my blood, which is the new agreement that God makes with his people. And this blood is poured out for many to forgive their sins." Notice it wasn't just for those who felt they deserved it. He said, "Every one of you drink this." Those who feel unworthy, drink this. Those who feel ashamed, drink this. Those who feel embarrassed, drink this. Let me tell you about a time when I felt all three: unworthy, ashamed, and embarrassed. By the age of 18, I was well on my way to a drinking problem. My system had become so resistant to alcohol that a six-pack of beer had little or no impact on me. At the age of 20, God not only saved me from hell after this life, he saved me from hell during it. Only he knows where I was headed, but I think I have a pretty good idea. For that reason, part of my decision to follow Christ included no more beer, so I quit. But curiously, the thirst for beer never left. It hasn't hounded me or consumed me, but 2 or 3 times a week, the thought of a good beer sure sounds enticing, so I have to be careful. Non-alcoholic beers have no appeal. You see, it's not the flavor of the drink that's tempting, it's the buzz. But for more than 20 years, drinking has never been a major issue. A couple of years ago, however, it nearly became one. I lowered my guard a bit. It started with the thought, one beer with barbecue won't hurt. Then the next time it was with Mexican food. Then there was a time or two with no food at all. Over a period of 2 months, I went from no beers to maybe 1 or 2 a week. For most people, that's not a problem, but for me, it could have become one. You know when I began to smell trouble? One hot Friday afternoon, I was on my way to speak at our annual men's retreat. Did I mention the day was hot? Brutally hot. I was so thirsty, a soda wouldn't do. So I began to plot. Where could I buy a beer and not be seen by anyone I knew? With that thought, I crossed the line. You see, what's done in secret is best not done at all. But I did it anyway. I drove to an out-of-the-way convenience store, parked, and waited until all patrons had left. I entered, bought my beer, held it close to my side, and hurried to the car. And that's when the rooster crowed. It crowed because I was sneaking around. It crowed because I knew better. It crowed because, and this really hurt, the night before I'd scolded one of my daughters for keeping secrets from me. And now what was I doing? I threw the beer in the trash and I asked God to forgive me. A few days later, I shared my struggle with the elders of our church and some members of the congregation who were happy to chalk up the matter to experience and move on, but I couldn't. The shame plagued me. Of all the people to do such a thing, so many people could be hurt by my stupidity. And of all the times to do such a thing, on the way to minister at a retreat, what hypocrisy. I felt like a bum. I felt like Peter. And while forgiveness found its way into my head, the elevator designed to lower it to my heart was out of order. To make matters worse, Sunday rolled around and I found myself on the front row of our church awaiting my turn to speak. Again, I had been honest with God, honest with the elders, honest with myself, but still I struggled. Would God want a guy like me to preach? Did I really still have a place at his table? Well, the answer came in the form of supper, the Lord's Supper. The same Jesus who had prepared a meal for Peter had prepared one for me. The same shepherd who had trumped the devil trumped him again. And the same Savior who had built a fire on the shore stirred a few embers in my heart. Every one of you drink this. And so I did. It felt good to be back at the table. And what was true for me is true for you. No matter what you've done, He doesn't want the heavy burden of shame to keep you from fellowshipping with Him. Even in the midst of our enemies and reminders of our shortcomings, Jesus says to come, take part in the meal He prepared, so you can be nourished, restored, and refreshed. We may not start life with a lot of baggage, but the older we get, the more we seem to pick up along the way. Of course, not everyone carries such a heavy load. In the Bible, we see that some of these light travelers were the people Jesus enjoyed the most. They weren't encumbered by political pursuits or theological debates or high taxes. For them, life was simpler. Trust came easy. In fact, Jesus even said, the kingdom of heaven belongs to them. And unless we become like them, we will not enter the kingdom. If you want to understand how to travel light, there's a lot you can learn from children. Let's hear what they have to say.
Shame is like when you've done something wrong and you're like embarrassed and like you know you shouldn't have done that.
Like if you did something wrong, it's kind of like guilty.
Like if you hurt someone's feelings.
I felt shame when I put deodorant on my dad's toothbrush.
I flushed my mom's book down the toilet.
When he woke up, he said last night it tasted terrible.
Me and Ash were running around the house and my dad told us not to and we kept running around.
The action just comes right out of you without knowing it. It just comes right out. It's like super hard.
And I felt ashamed, but at least he didn't give us a spanking.
I got rid of the shame by telling my dad that I did it.
I told her because I told her. I tell people I'm sorry. We get rid of shame by believing in God and trusting in Him. I would pray because all that shame kind of goes away. I don't think God wants us to live with shame. He wants us to believe in Him and then to love Him, and He doesn't want any sorrow or sadness
because He doesn't want us to be sad.
God's love is stronger than shame.
God takes my shame and throws it away.
The heavy bags of shame were too much for Peter to bear. He denied Christ. He did the thing he swore he'd never do, and the burden of regret weighed him down like suitcases of cement. So what did he do? He hid. On the night of the crucifixion, we find Peter, the boldest and bravest of Christ's disciples, now hiding in the shadows. Plagued by feelings of failure, inadequacy, and doubt, Peter felt he had lost his place at Christ's table for good. But when we turn the pages of Scripture, we see that God penned a new chapter in Peter's life. Christ not only forgave Peter, He restored Peter. He empowered him to speak boldly to the masses and bring healing to the lame. Peter's story did not end with his failure. Oh no. His dark night of the soul gave way to a bright future, everlasting life with Christ. And what's true for Peter is true for us. Thanks to the work of the cross, we are forgiven, restored. We can look to the future without focusing on the past. So what are you waiting for? Your good shepherd invites you, even now, to lay down your baggage. Lay down your guilt, your regrets, your doubts, your shame, every burden you thought you could carry on your own. Let's start traveling light.
The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want. He makes me to lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside the still waters. He restores my soul. He leads me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Even when I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. For you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup runs over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life. And I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever.
Welcome to the last session of Watch Your Mouth. We learned in the previous session that what comes out of our mouths flows directly from our hearts. When we align ourselves with God and His will, we pour out our praises, thanksgiving, and encouragement. But when we go our own way, our speech can be like daggers. In this final session, Tony warns us about the most harmful ways we can use our words: insults, gossip, slander. We can use words as a weapon rather than a tool for blessing people and glorifying God. Before hearing from Tony, listen to Eloise share about what happened to her dad, a pastor, when he suggested the church buy a new property.
My father pastored the same church for 50 years, and he really genuinely cared about the church. And in our family, my dad taught us that it was important to love everybody, to not speak bad about people. It wasn't very long that I found out that within inside the walls of the church, that everybody didn't think the same way. I remember this one particular time, the church was voting on the property across the street. My dad was trying to push we should buy this property, and people got a little heated about it. To sell their point that they shouldn't buy the property, they began to say things about my father that just weren't true. I heard them say some really, really bad things about my dad. It began to spread throughout the church. Like, for instance, people who believed in him and what he was trying to do, then you'd hear slanderous things about those people, and it just spread. It was just like a cancer. I remember getting very, very angry at the people in my church. What they said about my father is like they were saying it about me. And that hurt. I didn't want to be involved in ministries. I didn't want to do anything in the church. I questioned people's faith. I questioned even my faith because I didn't like the people at my church. The slander, the words, the gossip, everything that was said about my father had a tremendous impact on my family. A couple of my brothers left the church, and they felt like Christian people that would say those kinds of things were evil. They never returned. And not only did they never return to our church, they never returned to church. It's been many, many years since this happened at my church, and I am just getting to the point where I'm okay with talking about what happened to me and how I felt about it, and to really love people. My church now, I've learned to actually love people unconditionally. My dad was a huge part of that. He never changed. He loved the people, and I never saw my dad say anything mean to him. He continued to love him like Christ had said he was supposed to love him. And that's where he taught me to love people in spite of the things that they do and the things that they say. But I've always felt like Christian people need to realize that inside the walls of a church, inside the walls where you think you're the safest, that you can really damage somebody.
A woman one day was told who had been bitten by a rabid dog that she had rabies. She went to the doctor. When the doctor told her what was wrong, she began making out a list. The doctor said, "Is that a list of people you want to talk to about this condition?" She said, this is a list of the people I want to bite. You know, we can use our mouths to do a lot of harm. Harm perhaps that was done to us when we've been bitten by the tongue of another, and we wind up biting in the lives of others, passing on the disease to other people who actually need help and healing, who we wind up hurting even more. There can be evil in your esophagus. There can be Satan in your speech. It comes in a number of forms. Gossip. Proverbs 20:19 says, "A gossip tells secrets to harm." A gossip is passing on, shh, let me tell you a secret. That secret is not there to benefit. That secret is to pass on information to create a perspective in the hearer that you want them to know. And God hates gossip. The secret passing on of information where good is not the intent. And I know we can camouflage it and say, well, I'm just telling you this so that you can pray about it, make it sound spiritual. But we know our intent is really not prayer or God, especially if we haven't talked to the person about it. We're passing it on, hush-hush secrets with no good intent. Someone has described gossip like sending a message like feathers flying in the wind. Once it gets out there, it goes wherever the wind takes it. And most of us have done our share of gossiping, and most of us have been gossiped about and know how messages can get out there, can get misconstrued, like passing on a message to the next person who passes on to the next person, and by the time you get to the end of the line, that's a totally different message or a totally different twist on the message, so that the truth has become distorted. Not only is there gossip, but there's slander. Slander means to intentionally, directly speak evil. The Bible says that slander breaks fellowship with God. Psalm 15, verses 1 to 3. In fact, 1 Corinthians 5:11 says, don't even associate with a slanderer. People who they don't hide it. They're not just gossiping. They are talking down in evil terms against a person. They're not just talking about evil that was done. They are talking about the person and making the person evil. In other words, their intent is evil. And so the scripture says that don't fellowship with that kind of person. It reminds me somewhat humorously of the constant battle between Winston Churchill and Lady Astor. They were in the British Parliament together, and Lady Astor said to Winston, Winston, if you were my husband, I'd put arsenic in your tea. Of course, Winston said, if you were my wife, I'd drink it. I mean, they were going after each other over and over again, just speaking evil every day against each other. Husbands and wives do this. They slander one another. Friends do this. Of course, we do this with enemies easily. So gossip, slander, okay, and then there's flattery. That's like a chocolate-covered lie. Okay, you're lying, you're not being honest, but you got so much chocolate around it that it sounds good even though the core of it is not real. You're just making up stuff to make the person feel good, but you've got some dishonesty in there. The Bible calls it dishonest communication. Flattery is something you smell, but you don't swallow. Because people can be building you up with the goal of ultimately tearing you down. Evil speech, evil in our communication, whether it's gossip or slander or the flattery that really isn't real, goes against God, who's a God of truth. And yes, we are to speak the truth. We are to do it kindly, but we're not to intentionally go out to use our tongues to hurt people. If you're a flatterer, a gossiper, if you're a slanderer, let's get that corrected right away, because God will break fellowship with you when your tongue is used in this manner.
So I grew up in Ohio, and it was really cool when the Lord called me to the inner city of Chicago. My role there was working with high school youth and got to do a lot of sports and basketball programs with them and mentorship with them. I just tried to love them and be me and tried to honor Christ in what I did. And I remember as I started working with many of these high school students and these guys that I would play basketball with, very quickly they would ask me questions like why I spoke the way I spoke. And next thing I know, they're changing the way they talk a little bit, or they're watching what they say when I'm around. It was fascinating to me to see just how something as simple as just talking in a simple, God-honoring way impacted people who've never experienced that before. And through that time, I really was able to use just my words as a way to minister to these young people. I mean, they grew up in a culture full of swearing and degrading women, and that's just how they talk to each other. I got to run a program called Discipleship Basketball. So every Saturday morning, me and the guys would get together and we'd play basketball for a couple hours. One student in particular lost a one-on-one basketball game with me. And he had to take all his rap music off of his iPod and put Christian rap and worship music on there. And he comes back and he's like loving this music. And the fascinating thing to me was that his language started to change. The more he listened to the godly music, started to affect even how he spoke. I would watch how they interacted with girls, especially the things that they would say to them. And I just chose to speak about women in a way that would be more honoring. And they would slowly start to pick up on that, and they would all of a sudden realize that not everyone speaks to women that way. Not everyone talks about women that way or views women that way. One day I remember I was walking with a student that I was really close with. We were just walking down the street, and he kind of said something at a girl walking the other way, and it was very degrading and kind of vulgar. And I just kind of asked him a question, like, why did you say that? And he just kind of looked at me really surprised, almost like, well, of course, that's what you say to women. It led us to this really good conversation about how to speak to women and about just why we say the things that we say. And for him, he had never actually thought about it. He just talked in a way that he learned. He just said things that other people say, that he picked up his whole life. While working with my students in Chicago, it was great to exhibit language that honors and glorifies God, but then it led to what's really important, is sharing why. That led us to many conversations about the gospel and how God has come to set us free from sin and death and to redeem us, and calling us out of a life of words that are destructive, and to really help them understand not just to speak in a way that's good, but to speak in a way that honors Christ because we love him.
All of us use mouthwash because we know our mouths can get dirty. And so they need cleansing. We got to brush our teeth. We want the scent coming out of our mouths, which can every night go south, to be fresh. God wants us to use some spiritual mouthwash and get the dirt out of our discourse. Dirty discourse, unclean mouth. Remember what Isaiah said in Isaiah 6. He says, I'm a man of unclean lips, and I live among a people of unclean lips. There's dirt in our discourse. Dirty mouths have become normal today. It's normal in a lot of the music. It's normal in a lot of the TV program. It's normal in a lot of the public square. It's normal in places we work. It's normal just every place you turn. Dirt in the discourse has not only become normal, but acceptable. But it shouldn't be for us. We should be known for the cleanliness of our speech and not for the filth of our speech. Filthy speech can come in a lot of ways. Ephesians 5:4 calls it coarse jesting. Joking in such a way that the coarseness of it is dirty. And while some of that joking can make you laugh, make you even laugh harder, it's dirt that should be avoided, God says. Dirty speech, dirty discourse is also taking the name of the Lord God in vain. In vain means emptiness, without purpose. You just throwing it in. In fact, it's found at the head of some cuss words, where you throw God's name in a meaningless way. That's dirty discourse. That pure, holy, glorious name to be dragged in the mud by the dirt of our culture, and sometimes by the dirty mouths of his own children. Just like we don't want people to call us out of our name, God does not want to be called out of his name. That is without purpose and meaning. That brings in profanity, but it also brings in something else. Cursing. I don't mean cussing in terms of profanity. I mean cursing, where you curse a person, that is, where you call down evil on them instead of blessing them. Why is that a big deal? Let me read you. Psalm chapter 109. And he also loved cursing, so it came to him. And he did not delight in blessing, so it was far from him. But he clothed himself with cursing as with his garment, and it entered into his body like water, and like oil to his bones. Let it be to him as a garment with which he covers himself, and for a belt with which he constantly girds himself. There was a saying we had growing up: It was what goes around, comes around. Guess what the psalmist is saying? May the cursing that he gives to others fall back on him. May the calling down of evil on that other person bounce back to him. Did you know God is what goes around comes around God? That if you want to be a curser, you're inviting cursing. That's why Romans 12 says, bless those who curse you. Why? Not because they deserve blessing, but because you deserve blessing. You want God to bounce back to you what you gave out to them. If you give cursing out to them, you're just getting from them what you gave to them. And God says, do just the opposite. Give out what you want back to you. So if you think about you and not just about them, all of a sudden, cursing is not a great idea. I hope that this Bible study has been meaningful. I hope that you see the tongue is not a small thing, it's a big thing to be taken seriously. A lady one day came to her pastor after he had preached this strong, marvelous, impactful word about the tongue. She said, Pastor, I heard your message, and today I want to put my tongue on the altar. He said, lady, your tongue is too big for this altar. Don't let your tongue be too big for God's altar. He's got room for my tongue, your tongue, all of our tongues to be placed under his authority as we watch our mouth, now that we understand the power of the tongue.
Thousands of people walk through those doors every weekend, and sometimes I'll actually come out in the lobby and just watch people as they come in, and I start thinking to myself, I wonder how many of these people are actually going to be in heaven with me. And I hope that doesn't sound judgmental, because I mean, I love these people. These are some of the people I love more than anyone else on the earth. But the thought does go through my mind, because I don't want to play a game here. I want this to be the real thing. And I think we'd all agree that just because a person goes to church, it doesn't mean they're going to heaven. And just because a person calls himself a Christian, it doesn't mean necessarily that they're really a follower of Jesus Christ. I mean, think about in your own church, what percentage would you think of the people that attend there are actually going to be in heaven? Done so many funerals in this room, and yet some of those memorial services were like the greatest worship experiences of my life. I don't know if you've ever been to a funeral where the person who died was just one of those, I guess you could almost call them saints. Like they really lived it out. Like they were just godly people. It wasn't just the talk. They didn't just say they were Christians and quote all these verses. They lived them out. And I mean, even as I talk about that, I can think of people right now in my mind, services I did on the stage of people who passed away, friends of mine. And sometimes I even think about, man, what do their faces look like right now? Because I remember them on earth, and they had so much joy on earth because of their relationship with God, because they were so tight with Jesus. And I think, okay, what in the world did they feel the moment they saw him? And sometimes I'll talk to the crowd in here, and I'll say, hey, think about her. You guys know the way she was with Jesus, and think about what it was like when she first saw him, and that she's there right now, or he's there right now. And I mean, I look at my life, and there have been so many times where I've experienced like this crazy amount of joy. Like, wow, that was such a great experience. I was so happy. And then I think, man, nothing in my life, I've never even come close to feeling the amount of joy that those people feel right now and are feeling every moment in the presence of God. And so it's such a rush to be in a room, and you're supposed to be at this memorial service, and yes, everyone's crying, but at the same time, they're also smiling, they're also worshiping. I mean, sometimes we're screaming out in worship because we're so happy for this person. Meanwhile, tears are coming down our faces, and yet in the sadness, there's this look of peace. There's this look like, everything's good, everything's fine. I'm gonna miss this person like crazy, but I am so happy right now and so at peace. And then, you know, I have those, and then there's these other services where, honestly, I don't know, you know, and I look at a person's life and I think, okay, there's some good there, there's some questionable, I can't tell if they were genuine in their faith in God. So a lot of times I don't spend a lot of time even talking about the person. I'll just address everyone else out there. And then there's times when it's just flat out depressing. There are times when I literally am sick to my stomach before a funeral because there's no hope. Like, there's nothing in that person's life to show me that they were truly followers of Jesus Christ. I mean, they'd be so accurately described, like in the Bible where it talks about the hardened path or the rocky soil or the thorny soil, like it. But definitely, you don't see the fruit, you don't see the result of someone who really loves Jesus Christ. And it's the one thing about my job that I still absolutely hate, and that's not an exaggeration. I can't stand walking up that aisle, coming up on this platform, giving a service, and meanwhile, in my heart, I'm thinking, there's absolutely no hope. And people will try to say things, but we all leave there, and it's not just me. Let's be honest, we've all left some of those services thinking, this is eternity. And I think for us as believers, those are the most depressing and sorrowful moments of our lives. When someone we know passes away, and there really wasn't much hope, much to hold on to. Every weekend at Cornerstone, we have people come up on the stage and get baptized. And it's so weird how baptism here in America is so different from other places in the world. Like, I have some friends who are missionaries in India, and they told me, they go, Francis, it's just like in the New Testament times, where people who get baptized here, the moment they enter that water, literally their families will leave them. Literally, they'll lose their jobs, they'll literally lose their homes, they'll lose everything because they decided to associate with Jesus Christ. In fact, one of my pastors, Matt, just came back from Iraq, and he was talking about how he was talking about the believers there, and he made this statement. He says, what we call sanctification, they call prerequisite. In other words, out here, typically someone will say, okay, I'll become a Christian, and then later on in life, if they decide to give up some of their sin or give up another area of their life, we go, oh, look, you know, they're growing in their walk with the Lord. And he says, well, out there, it's not like that. Out there, you make a decision. You decide, okay, I'm going to follow Jesus. That means I'm willing to give everything up right now. And by entering the baptismal waters, I'm saying I'm willing to lose everything, to lose it all. I give up my life. I literally die to myself to follow this Jesus because he is so worth it to me. And it's just like Jesus. When he taught the people, he wouldn't say, well, you know, just believe in me, and then later on we'll decide what you want to give up, what you don't. No, he tells ahead of time. He goes, listen, are you sure you want to follow me? Are you sure you want to follow me? Count the cost. because he says in Luke 14, verse 33, he says, if anyone is not willing to give up everything he has, he cannot be my disciple.
Thank you so much for joining us on WCC TV. We hope to see you again next week at 5 p.m. for our next episode. God bless you all, and remember, give God the glory.